I'm Shaun Haney, and this is RealAg on the Weekend. Let's get real and get connected with the week that was in Canadian agriculture. RealAg on the Weekend starts now. Welcome to RealAg on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME. I'm Shaun Haney of RealAgriculture.com. I'm your host for this week's show. It is great to be with you. Hope you're having yourself a great weekend. It was a great week. There was so many issues in agriculture. I'll tell you what, it's the cold weather has definitely not slowed down the news cycle. So we'll get to many of this week's top stories here today on the show. Looking forward to it. Hey, if you have any feedback on today's show, I'd encourage you to send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms, or you can always call the RealAg feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. Okay, today on the show, I got a bit of a special treat for you. So on the RealAg Radio podcast on Fridays, we do a RealAg issues panel. And we have Kelvin, Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of Real Agriculture usually join me, and then we'll bring another guest in. And this week we had Meagan Murdoch from H&K Strategies. Well, we didn't get to all the topics on this week's show, so we did some bonus. And sometimes we put that bonus at the end of the RealAg Radio podcast. But I thought, you know what, we're going to bring the bonus to RealAg on the Weekend. That's right. So the panel will be here to discuss a number of different topics. For example, we're going to talk about Premier Moe's response to Prime Minister Trudeau and really having a two-tiered tax system when it comes to the carbon tax and how that's impacting people in Saskatchewan. That's just one of the topics that we'll discuss today. We're also going to hear from Patrick Haan. He is Chief Petroleum Analyst for Gas Buddy to talk about diesel prices. So great stuff indeed. And actually, that's exactly where we're going to start. So I mentioned to Patrick Haan that we've seen a bit of a relief, a bit of a drop rate right now in diesel prices since early September. What's creating that, and how do we think about this going forward?
Yeah, things have cooled off a bit. Diesel prices have actually inched down a little bit from where we were back in mid-September, when the average price for diesel across Canada hit about $1.88 a liter. We've fallen a little bit, not a whole lot, to $1.81 a liter, but really any decrease in the fall is something to get excited about, because this is not usually the time of year that we see diesel prices inching down. In fact, if we rewind to last year, we were seeing diesel prices explode, especially in eastern Canada. A lot of that had to do with the fact that imports were under a lot of pressure on the eastern Canadian coast because of Europe's need to heat itself last winter. Going into winter, natural gas inventories were extremely tight. Europe was buying a lot of diesel because it was cutting off Russia. In addition, last year saw Chinese coal demand surge, and China, to supplement coal, was buying all sorts of distillate, diesel and heating oil. And so that caused the price of diesel last year to be much higher. So we're getting a bit of a break this year. Overall, the price of oil has seen some pressure, which has certainly bucked some Americans and Canadians alike, thinking that oil prices and diesel prices could go up because of the situation in the Middle East. But we're getting a little bit of relief as the broader economy slows down. Inflation has still been challenging, and that has continued to induce higher interest rates as inflation remains rather high. And that's kept some downward pressure on the price of diesel.
Yeah, last year, Europeans were rewarded by Mother Nature, more warmer than normal winter. Obviously, winter is upon us. Is there still big challenges in that regard in front of us, and challenges for diesel supplies if, say, we're to have a colder than usual winter?
Yeah, Mother Nature is always a big wild card when it comes to the price of diesel, simply because so many areas of northeastern United States and into Canada can use heating oil as well to heat your home. So a big cold spell could certainly spell challenges this year. Diesel and heating oil inventories are still rather tight in the United States. Now, we don't get as great of a view from Canadian data, but U.S. inventories remain rather tight, and that's going to set the tone here. There still could be a big upswing in the price of diesel if Mother Nature doesn't cooperate and throws us some very cold weather. That could mean a jump in the price of diesel as we head into the winter months. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on.
I mentioned OPEC Plus and some of the production cuts earlier this year. What is OPEC Plus up to going forward? What's your crystal ball tell you?
Well, OPEC Plus has put a lot of pressure on oil prices. The Saudis really kicked it off this summer after oil prices were as low as $65 and $70 a barrel. OPEC Plus, really Russia, the part of the plus there, got together with Saudi Arabia. It was really Saudi Arabia that kicked things off by cutting production voluntarily and on its own this summer. And they've extended those cuts now through the end of the year. That's when OPEC's cuts will pick up into 2024. That's been the wild card, something to watch moving forward. Will the Saudis extend those production cuts into the new year, or will they allow them to lapse? Well, I think right now the pressure is going to be on the Saudis to continue those cuts simply because those cuts have now materialized in the price of oil that's been above $80 a barrel for the last couple of months. And so I would look for OPEC to keep its supply situation rather tight, and that could have an impact on diesel prices moving forward. But if we see any movement on the global economy, that certainly could cause some additional pain points as well, especially if central banks start to ease the financial situation by lowering interest rates, something that they've hinted that they could do at some point in 2024.
And then the thought there is, just for the audience, stronger economy, more demand, pressure on, or not pressure on prices, but strength in prices.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If we start to see a hint at even interest rates coming down, that would likely bolster the stock market, get the market going on the fact that growth could return. And that growth would likely mean a growth in diesel and distillate consumption, as well as jet fuel and gasoline. A stronger economy, one that's growing more, is going to consume more petroleum. And that's the thinking.
What about the future for renewable diesel?
The market is limited still a bit by the difficulty in getting some of that renewable diesel to the market. Keep in mind that refineries need to convert their facilities from producing traditional diesel to biodiesel. And so that process can be time consuming. But a lot of those refineries in California have made that switch to producing biodiesel. And that's primarily why California, I would estimate that at least half of what California is consuming in terms of diesel is now biodiesel. And so where there have been government credits and mandates, it's pushed market share for biodiesel up significantly.
If you want to hear the rest of my conversation with Patrick Haan of Gas Buddy, go to RealAgriculture.com or download the RealAg Radio podcast. We'll be right back with more here of RealAg on the weekend, of course, on 650 CKOM and 980 CJ.
You know, there's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup, weed control, field trial results, yield strategies, and so much more. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF, Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast from your favorite streaming service. Download the latest podcast today.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
Welcome back to RealAg on the weekend. Hope everybody's having themselves a great time and you're enjoying this sort of, rather, as Kelvin has described it at RealAgriculture, a bit of abrupt change to winter conditions. Okay, so wanted to give everybody a little bit of a taste of what we do on Fridays on the RealAg Radio podcast. We have the RealAg Issues panel, and where we cover some of the biggest issues of the week. We have played for you before some clips from that show, but we ran out of time on Friday. It was really, really unfortunate. So what I want to do is bring the panel in to RealAg on the weekend here, and we can talk about some of the things we did not get to. So the panel is Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, and a good friend of the show. It is Meagan Murdoch, and friend of us too, not just friend of the show. It's friend of us. It is Meagan Murdoch from H&K Strategies based in Toronto. Lyndsey, this week we saw the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council put out a report that the job shortages are in agriculture are really costing not only the egg industry, but also the Canadian economy as a whole.
Yeah, and so we've been waiting for this report for a little while. We knew it was coming, and we know certainly that we've all we've talked anecdotally for sure about the impact of not enough workers, not enough of a talent pool to draw from for agriculture, but now we have some numbers around it. And this is really what CARC, as the acronym is, this is what they do, is really try to figure out, a strategy, and they have a national labor strategy for the industry. And this report sort of really puts some numbers around it, puts the scope of this in perspective, and it's huge. And Kelvin, I don't know if you've got those numbers handy because I don't have it right in front of me, but it really does set out the challenge we have ahead of us and how we're supposed to meet this need. And so Kelvin, if you can rattle off those numbers, because there's a second part to this that we definitely need to talk about.
The big number is $3.5 billion. That's the estimated loss to on-farm agriculture businesses in Canada in 2022 because of not having the workers that they needed. So $3.5 billion was the cost of basically unfilled jobs in on-farm businesses in Canada last year.
That's just primary agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
That's not even in the C-suite and research and all that kind of stuff. That's staggering.
Yeah, and there's a vacancy rate, they say, of an average of 7.4%. This research was done with the Conference Board of Canada. So 7.4%, 2 in 5 employers say they couldn't find the workers they needed. So, and that's well above the average of the entire economy.
Now, Meagan, we're seeing a lot of attention right now. And I would say a bit of a political, maybe or an opinion shift, I should say, in terms of how Canadians feel about immigration. Government came out with its plan on immigration going forward. But this ties into this shortage for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So every year, the Minister of Immigration has to table an annual report to Parliament on the immigration levels and targets moving forward. So we got that on November 1st. Minister Miller tabled it in Parliament. And he was under a lot of pressure. There's been many public opinion polls released in the recent months to reduce those targets that had previously been released in years past for the coming years. And, all of this underpinned by a lack of housing and, people looking for any reason or any way to improve the housing situation, and immigration has taken a hit on that. So the plan that he tabled in Parliament keeps the targets at what he had previously released for 2024 and 2025. So immigration targets will continue to increase for the next 2 years. But something that changed was that starting in 2026, the numbers will hold steady at 500,000. Now, despite all the pressure for the immigration minister to reduce the number of temporary foreign workers, those who come in on farm and help pick a lot of produce and manage a lot of that primary agriculture, as well as international students, to reduce those numbers, he did not commit to do so. Instead, he also released a strategic plan as a result of a ton of consultation earlier this year that will do many things, though significant detail is lacking on how it might impact temporary foreign workers at the end of the day. But I would say a spotlight in there, something really good to see, which I think is going to be helpful to the agriculture industry, is that he's created the role of the Chief International Talent Officer. And that role will oversee policies to ensure they're in sync with our long-term skills and labor needs. So, if she can see needs in the agriculture sector, I'm really hopeful that role will help ensure that our immigration policy actually matches what's needed on the ground.
Well, and before people sort of make the assumption that, well, if the government sees there's a shortage of people to work on farm, we need to make sure we have a strong TFW program. It's not that simple because there are people that are lobbying against the TFW program and saying it, they're mistreated, there's issues. This is, I think actually some people really get hyperbolic, in my opinion, and talk about slavery. And this is a controversial topic in some circles, Lyndsey.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a lot of moving parts here too, right? Because like Meagan's alluded to, we're talking about, a lot of the growth in this country it all comes from people coming from somewhere else to live here. We have a fundamental issue, though, of trying to attract people to this sector. And that has been going on for quite some time. We've got things in place to try and make agriculture, not just farming, but every aspect of the agriculture industry more attractive to people who are deciding what they want to do. And so CARC has done some of that work as well as looking into, the likelihood of people switching careers or being interested in moving into agriculture, everything from finance and marketing and all those sorts of things, because there are vacancies there too. But we often think about, and for good reason, just that, there are a lot of jobs in agriculture that quite honestly have always been difficult to fill. People don't necessarily want to work in the barn, or don't necessarily want to drive trucks, or don't necessarily want to work in a processing plant. And so we are very reliant on people that are willing to do those jobs, and they just so happen to live in other countries, and we have to have a clear way that we can get them to Canada, because ultimately our industry is suffering, and this isn't just feeding Canadians. This is food that gets exported around the world. So it's really important that we are able to actually run an industry properly with a full complement of talent.
Yeah, and Kelvin, I think one of the misconceptions here too is some people from outside the industry jump to, we'll just pay people more. Like, just they must be underpaid. If no one will work there, they're underpaid.
And groceries aren't expensive enough as it is right now.
Well, yeah, there's that. Of course, I agree, Meagan, absolutely. But that doesn't solve the problem really at all.
We could double wages, and like Meagan said, that would lead to higher food prices. But that signal still needs to work its way through the system. It's not an immediate, people wouldn't just immediately know how to work in a processing plant doing a certain cut on a certain type of animal or what. There's certain jobs that it takes training, and you have to build up the workforce, and it's not just an instant change. So yeah, just paying more isn't the answer. But there is an interesting confluence of issues here. We have unemployment. Just yesterday, StatsCan released its report showing rising unemployment in Canada. And so what happens if that trend continues? Is government going to have the appetite to continue to allow TFW numbers at the rates that they have been if we have more Canadians not working? The flip side to that, though, is food prices, and how food prices are such an issue right now. And if we want to fight rising food prices, labor is certainly an expensive component of that formula that goes into making a food price. So that's where we have these different political compromises or decisions that will have to be made going forward.
Yeah, and I think too many times when it comes to this, people try to make it way too simple. But at the same time, I think this underscores the importance of programs like 4-H, Ag in the Classroom, trying to bring more people into this really warm circle of agriculture. And it was interesting. I was at a University of Lethbridge dinner when the new president was the big ceremony, not an induction ceremony, but I can't remember what they call implementation or something like that. It was a very kind of a strange word how they describe it. Anyway, I was at the supper, and I was with the faculty of management dean, and he talked about how when they talk to students outside of agriculture and talk about here's some agricultural classes and some of the opportunities and some of all these jobs that are open in agriculture, people that didn't grow up around the industry have a really not very clear vision of all the opportunity. We have to do a better job as the industry to make sure that we are selling ourselves in a much more aggressive fashion than we have been, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. And this job shortage that Clark's talking about, that's on farm. But that number gets even bigger when we talk about even on the industry side, and we're running out of farm kids. Like that feeder system of farm kids is not as abundant as it once was, as we've seen consolidation at the primary level. There's lots of listeners here, I'm sure, would look around in your local communities, and you would definitely agree with that. We're going to be back with more of Real Ag on the Weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
The next generation is the future of agriculture, but how do we launch from one role to leading? From succession planning and family dynamics to understanding finances and making the tough calls to discovering paths others have taken all through agriculture, the Successors Podcast covers it all. Tune in with me, your host, Kara Oosterhuis, simply by searching The Successors on your favorite podcast platform, or you can find it by visiting www.realagriculture.com.
Whether you're seeding, harvesting, or anything in between, the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com has you covered. Timely agronomic information from industry experts available online anytime. Give your wheat crop a good start and a great finish with the Wheat School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by C&M Seeds, Syngenta Canada, and the Alberta Wheat and Barley Commission.
Welcome back to Real Ag on the Weekend, here with Kelvin Heppner, Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture, as well as Meagan Murdoch of H&K Strategies based in Toronto. Meagan, earlier this week, we heard a lot out of Premier Moe talking about what he is going to do or not do when it comes to the carbon tax, in a real response to what we saw in terms of the carve-out in Atlantic Canada. What are your thoughts?
Well, I thought he put out a very good video. Maybe could have been a little shorter, but I thought he made his arguments really simply, in language that anyone could understand. Was really impactful. You know, it looked like he filmed it in his kitchen. Just really a man of the people trying to stick up for Saskatchewanians. And, I have to agree with him. It's a tough decision to understand if you're not in Atlantic Canada. Of course, we all heat our houses with some sort of fuel. So to carve out, just a portion of the country was difficult. And Scott Moe decided that he was going to go toe to toe with the Prime Minister. And I thought he did it quite effectively. The details are a little difficult to understand how he might actually do it, how he can, kind of, for better, put it simply, pick and choose what taxes people pay. That's actually not something you're allowed to do in Canada. But he and his energy minister sound like they're ready to go to jail if they're put indeed in carbon jail, as they call it, for not paying the carbon tax on Saskatchewan energy bills.
Carbon jail. I wonder what carbon jail looks like. Kelvin, it kind of feels a little bit like sort of like when some farmers in Western Canada fought the good fight and wanted to get rid of the wheat board and spent their own night in jail for a cause they believed in. Could we see this go that far? It would seem to be silly to do that, but this is a big time political issue in Saskatchewan. This is good for Moe in the polls.
Oh yeah, you're right. It sets up that opposition in certain, or that continues that battle between the provincial and federal governments that we've seen over the last number of years. But I don't think anybody will actually physically end up in jail on this. It would go to the courts before, and then they'd have to decide who had jurisdiction and whether Saskatchewan was in a legal position where it could actually avoid collecting this tax for the federal government. And this is, I guess, one reason why Saskatchewan can do this is because they have a crown corporation that looks after their energy bills. It's not like in Alberta where you've got private companies that are required to have the carbon tax or the price as a line item on their receipts or on their bills. So it certainly sets up an interesting political battle. Even if Saskatchewan's on shaky legal ground here, there's certainly a strong argument from a political side of things and just the voter, where people are at right now, how they're feeling on this issue on Saskatchewan's side. So legally might be shaky ground, but politically, I think Moe's in a good position, strong position right now.
Yeah, what he said was, it's the federal government that has created two classes of taxpayers by providing an exemption for heating oil, an exemption that really only applies in one part of the country and effectively excludes Saskatchewan. I think that resonates for this two class of tax system is something that Moe and others have really pushed down on. Indeed, Lyndsey, we're talking about a province went to the Supreme Court to fight the carbon tax, of which the federal government, fought them. And now we're issuing carve-outs in one part of the country and not the other. You can understand why it's a tough one for people to sort of swallow.
Well, and I completely understand where Moe and frankly, supporters are coming from on this one is exactly that. I mean, this is we've seen sort of now a bit of a move from the Liberal stance of, this price on pollution, and it's going to increase. Well, first they said it wasn't. Now they say it is, and it's going to continue to increase. And so I think, seeing this slight step back on, one area and one type of it's on heating oil or on heating fuel, that it does create an opportunity for exactly those questions of, okay, well, then why are we paying this on heating oil? It's just as difficult for people in Saskatchewan to have to pay their heating bills and this carbon tax on their heating bills as anywhere else. And frankly, it's a lot colder. Yeah, it's a lot colder in Saskatchewan than it is in the Atlantic provinces. So, it kind of is a bit of a gift to Moe and to some of the provinces here on fighting the feds on this particular carbon tax, which, let's face it, has not been popular since day one when it comes to our provinces. So there you go.
Yeah, and not everybody agrees. This is in the CBC story, University of Alberta law professor Eric Adams, he was quoted as saying that, I'd be surprised if there is a get out of jail free card. The premier may not like the legislation, or how it's being administered, but that doesn't give you an opt-out clause. So for me, this is probably more political rhetoric than it is sustainable legal position.
What's the over and under between us on when this gets reversed? Because to Kelvin's earlier point, I don't think this gets to the courts. I think there's going to be maybe mounting pressure that maybe the government has to back down.
Before
you think they give a carve out?
Yeah, does this get to the courts, or is this like a 3-week thing that keeps escalating and someone blinks?
Well, we talked about the RealAg Radio podcast. We talked about, is this carve-out situation and the pressure from Premier Smith in Alberta, Premier Moe in Saskatchewan. Is this the end of is this the beginning of the end for the carbon tax, Kelvin?
I think it is potentially. I think this is the hole in the dam. It continues the erosion of it, and what happens in 3 years. So that pause is in effect right now for 3 years on heating oil. At that point, the carbon tax has risen quite a bit. I don't know the exact number that it'll be at in 2026, but say the Liberals in 2025, we have to have an federal election before October 2025. And what's their messaging in that campaign then? Hey, vote for us and we'll bring back the carbon tax at this elevated rate. So any carve out they give now is setting up a trap for themselves down the road that, to me, I think in many ways it leads itself to believe that they are going to be, if they issue more exemptions, they can't bring them back. It'll be politically difficult. And it's just, to me, this is the beginning probably of winding it down, which economists will argue that this may, if we all agree that we need to do something for the climate, carbon tax is a decentralized way of doing it. You don't have that centralized government control with all the potential for consequences from that. But it looks like we may be on the beginning of the end of this, at least first attempt at a carbon price here in Canada.
Right, but
getting way ahead of myself there.
I don't. The U.S. doesn't have a price on carbon, and they're finding ways to potentially reduce emissions.
The U.S. is the world's currency, and they can print money to fund that type of program. And Canada doesn't have that luxury. That's the big difference between Canada and the U.S. on that argument, I believe.
I'm going to say they have common sense. They don't have a price on carbon. Anyway, go ahead.
So, well, what I was going to say is that this also happens to be, for some of us anyway, a not surprising consequence of when the carbon tax came out, maybe not at the original price, but with this whole plan to increase it over time. realistically, part of the argument was this is just making everything more expensive. And now we're in a place of, incredibly high interest rates, incredibly high cost of living. And it's something that you can single out and say, this is added to these bills that I pay. And that's the one you can see. Like it's added elsewhere. You just can't see it. So it becomes a really easy thing as consumers and people who vote to say, look, you put this here and you can take this off. So do it because I'm having a tough time paying my bills. So, I mean, this isn't a completely, it's not a surprise necessarily that we've got to this point either.
Yeah. And Kelvin, I just reminded myself about, there's the price on carbon, but there's also carbon border adjustments or carbon tariffs. And Republican from Louisiana, U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy, he put forward some legislation potentially this week alongside Senator Lyndsey Graham of South Carolina called the foreign pollution fee, which was a different way another euphemism for carbon border adjustments.
To me, that's more of a politically saleable terminology in terms of explaining what you're trying to accomplish. It might be having the same effect, might be the same outcome as a carbon border adjustment, but that pollution fee on imports, basically, I think is something that the average voter can wrap their head around that idea and support that idea. So, and I should say, going back to the erosion of the carbon tax, whether it might not be the Liberal government that continues offering exemptions or further carve-outs, it may just be a change in government that the Canadian population forces to happen, and that might be the way that the carbon tax goes up, probably the most likely scenario at this point.
Watering down a very firm view that you offered up just minutes ago, Kelvin. Just saying.
Just offering some context to it.
He was arguing with himself there, I think.
Trudeau and his minister drew a line in the sand. They said, absolutely not. It's in print. It's been videoed. I look forward to Shaun playing the clips on this show in a few weeks, maybe a few months, when the decision is perhaps reversed.
You think so?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Heard it here first.
I cannot imagine the Atlantic response to something like that, but I wouldn't be surprised. It wouldn't be the first time a politician flip-flopped.
Oh, that is true. All of those Liberal MPs that were behind the Prime Minister during the announcement, doing the clap, they may have some different hand gestures for him if he was to reverse. Okay, thank you so much, panel. I really appreciate it. Hope we gave everybody a great taste here on RealAg on the weekend and what we talk about on Fridays. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with more here of RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.
Hi, I'm Lyndsey Smith of RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern for The Agronomists, Canada's only live, interactive, agronomy-based show. Each week, we answer your most pressing questions with a rotating panel of agronomists, researchers, and extension staff from across Canada. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or head to realagriculture.com/live at 8 p.m. Eastern.
Hi, I'm Bernard Tobin, host of the Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com. Throughout the year, on the Soybean School, we'll bring you timely agronomic video content from planting to harvest, from the latest agronomic research to the latest in production technology. Check out our massive video library on YouTube, RealAgriculture.com, or download the audio podcast versions wherever you get your podcasts. The Soybean School is brought to you by Pride Seeds, BASF, and Syngenta Canada.
I want to bring something up here on the show, here on RealAg on the weekend, that, I think we're going to have different parts of the audience that are really going to have different perspectives and different thoughts on it. And I expect that diversity of thought, and I really want your opinions. So you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. So what is the topic? So this week in Minnesota, we saw President Biden kick off a tour of rural America, as he called it. And I'm paraphrasing, but he talked about how, he really appealed to the fact that we need to make sure we keep small farms afloat. There's a lot of consolidation in the industry, and the piece that I'm curious on your feedback on is where he talks about the fact that if anybody wants to farm, they should be able to. And on Friday's RealAg Radio podcast, I kind of brought up, like, I hear where you're coming from on that, but does that work all the time? Is that making a promise that is like, should you be able to? Like, anybody that wants to be a doctor can be a doctor. Anybody that wants, I would love to be, like I said on the show, I would love to be a college football broadcaster, right? It doesn't mean I get to. Are we too focused? Like, the industry has a lot of challenges for those people that are in it. Are we focused on the wrong things? And hey, maybe you do agree with President Biden. And I want to hear from you. Do we need to be removing all barriers? Any barriers that are there preventing people, if you want to be a farmer, you should be able to be one. Now, that's really easy to say at 100,000 feet. It's really easy to say at a political rally. It's really easy to say when you don't need to provide details. What exactly does that look like, and what are the opportunity costs for that? Now, the challenge is our industry has a hard time attracting people into it. You heard the panel talking earlier about some of the shortages of workers in this industry. Okay? So we're obviously trying to get people into it. But at the same time, are we willing to fully subsidize? And is the taxpayer that worried about this that they'd be willing to say, yeah, I think my tax dollars should go to making sure that the government goes to all lengths, all possibilities, no stone left unturned to make sure if somebody wants to be a farmer, they can be a farmer. I kind of think it's unpractical. I don't actually think this is really policy. I really don't think this is necessarily a really great idea. Even knowing that, hey, we need to attract people into this industry. I just don't think that's the hole to fill. Now, do I want to see where we have, at the end of the day, however many, whether it's 100 years or 1,000 years in the future, there's one farmer in the province of Saskatchewan? No, but I also don't think, I just think it's completely unrealistic, and it's making an empty promise to people. And I feel bad for people that want to be farming that aren't currently doing so, right? And hey, listen, there's people that are working on farms today that would love to own their own farm, and there's some real barriers, and capital is one of them. This has become a very capital-intense industry. I know in the area that I grew up in, there is a lot of families that immigrated from overseas, in particular Holland, and all some of those families were working on local farms. There's also Japanese people that moved from Japan were working on farms, and some of those are many of them own farms today and are some of the top farmers. So we have a history where this has happened. I think it's become a lot more difficult now based on some of the capital, the intensity of the capital required to make it all happen in a very, very tight margin business. So there's steps that we can take to encourage people to want to farm and get people set up, some of the starter loans like what FCC offers, things like that. But to make an empty promise like President Biden did, I just don't know about that. Send me your thoughts. I want to know what you think about this and what the policy should be and where the priority should be in this area. shaney@realagriculture.com is my email, or of course the RealAg feedback line. It is 855-776-6147. That's all the time we have today for RealAg on the weekend. Make sure you check out RealAgriculture.com this weekend. Got a whole bunch of stories we didn't get to, of course, here on this show. It is your one-stop shop for all things agricultural news. We provide the RealAg insights and information on what is happening in the industry. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg on the weekend here on 650 CKOM and 980 CGME.